Okay, let's get going. So let's start this halacha that we started yesterday. Kol haminiach gago below ma'akeh bitel mitzvat aseh. Anyone who leaves his rooftop without a ma'akeh forsakes a positive commandment. V'over al lo saseh, and he is over on a mitzvah lo saseh shenemar, because there's also a thou shalt not included in the verbiage of the pasuk, as it says, "Below sasim damim beveisecha." Do not place blood in your house. I hope everyone got the next packet. Echad hagag ve'echad kol davar sheyesh bo sakana. And so this is when the Torah says, "Do not place blood in your house." It almost sounds Shakespearean in the way that it's expressed, right? But it's this prohibition of not placing blood in your house is inclusive not only of the mitzvah of makeh, but it basically says anything that presents hazards that you could potentially harm people, like let's say keeping a gun unlocked in your house. I know a lot of Canadians don't have guns, but in the US, this is a big issue. By law, you have to keep your rifle or your pistol locked up. But let's say you don't, and your grandchild comes and starts playing with it, God forbid, and something terrible happens. Not only have you created a tragedy, but you've also violated the Torah because you've placed blood in your house. Whereas that would be an example. So anything that could potentially cause a person to encounter danger and potentially die is under this rubric of do not place blood in your house. Kagon, sheyesh lo bor b'chatzero, ben yesh bo mayim ben ein bo. Let's say a person, for example, has a pit in his house, right? Guy's got a pit in his house. Chayav lasos lo chulia gavoa yutes yutfachim saviv. So he has to create some kind of barrier all around this pit of 10 tvachim high, olasos lo kisoy, or to make a cover for it. Like also, what would be a perfect example is a swimming pool that doesn't have a gate around it when there are little children, right? Unfortunately, we read about tragedies like this all the time. So that a person doesn't fall in and die. So it's actually a pit that has water in it is a swimming pool. And if you don't create a cover or you don't create a fence around it, you're actually in violation of v'lo sasim damim beveisecha. V'chein kol michshol sheyesh bo sakanas nefashos, and any other kind of potential hazard that involves threat to life, mitzvahs aseh lahasiro uli shomer mimenu uli hizoher bedavar yafe. There's an additional positive commandment to remove the hazard and to protect from it and to make sure that people are protected from it. Shenamar hishomer lecha ushmor nafshecha ma'od. As the Torah says, be careful and guard your soul very much. So not only is there a mitzvah to remove the hazard from others, but you also have to protect yourself. And that's also part of the Torah's commandment. V'im heiniach v'lo heisir hamichsholos hamevim lidei sakana bitel mitzvah saseh ve'ovar below sasim damim. So if a person leaves it alone and does not remove the hazards that can cause these dangers, I don't know why he's repeating himself. Again, he's been over on a mitzvah aseh, and he violates do not place blood in your house. Okay, kagon im sulam ra'ua omeid beveso v'chatzera. So some other examples. Let's say you've got a dilapidated ladder in your house or in your courtyard. V'chein hamagadol kelavra. So what's wrong with a dilapidated ladder? Person sees it, thinks it's a perfectly good ladder, and then he tries to climb up, and he gets to the 10th step, and the rung breaks, so the ladder cracks, and he ends up killing himself. Or a person who raises a bad dog, a wild dog, a pit bull, right? And it's prohibited to have a ferocious dog, even if the dog doesn't bite, but he just barks a lot at people and scares them. He says that's also problematic halachically. Kishema tapil isha miyir ato, because you could cause damage through frightening people. The classic example is from the Gemara. The Gemara gives an illustration of a man who had a very, very ferocious sounding dog, and a woman is walking down the street, and this dog all of a sudden starts lunging towards her and barking, and she, out of just the fright, she has a miscarriage. And so the guy says, "Oh, don't worry, he doesn't bite," right? And the Gemara's answer is "Netula toivosecha shlucha lakotzim." I think that's the language. The Gemara says all of your kindness has been thrown on the thorns, is the expression of the Gemara. Like, that's not helpful. It's not helpful to know that your dog doesn't bite. The fact that he scares people is in itself creating damage within society. V'chol hamagadol kelev ra, harehu omed be'arur. Anyone who raises a ferocious dog acquires a curse for themselves. Kamo hamagadel chazirim. Just like a person who raises pigs also gets a curse. We'll have to see what these sources are. The imhu kasher b'shalshela shel barzel mutter sha'az ein morav afachad la'adam mimenu. But if the dog is always tied up by a chain, then you're allowed to, because then people are not as fearful of the animal. Uve'ir hasmucha lisfar tzricha shimor me'oivim mutter lagadlo b'koshru b'yomu matiru b'layla. That if a city needs protection from its enemies, then you are allowed to have these dogs in the city for protection. You're allowed to, you have to keep them tied up during the day, and you can let them roam at night. Let's say you own a junkyard, junkyard dog, right? Let's say you own a junkyard, right? And so during the day, the dogs are tied up because the customers come in, and then at night, you lock the gates and you let the dogs roam wild. That's perfectly permissible because you're allowed to protect your property. Now, the kelev she'eno ra, she'eno minabeach al adam. So this is for our dog lovers out there. If a dog is not ferocious, which means it doesn't always bark at people, mutter lagadlo b'chol makom. You're allowed to raise such a dog. You're allowed to have such a dog as a pet. Ve'ein sarach lekashro klal. And you don't even have to keep it tied up because the dog is affectionate and loving. Va'achshav nahagu lahakil begidul kelev she'eno kashur biyom. He says there are people today who are lenient to not require a dog that they raise, even if the dog is a ferocious dog. They do not, they're not machmir to tie the dog up during the day. And what's the defense of that behavior? He says, some try to defend that practice because they say, well, the dog doesn't bite, but he's running around and frightening people. So he says, v'nitchu devarav. And the Rav Shulchan Aruch says that person's arguments have been already disproved. Or as we've pointed out, just because a dog doesn't bite doesn't mean that he can't do damage. A dog can frighten people and cause terror in the community, and that can have real repercussions. And therefore, any God-fearing person who has such a dog should make sure that the dog is tied up with a chain during the day, during the entire day, until the hour that people go to sleep. Afilu eino noshech ela min habeach, even if the dog is not a biter, but just scares people through its bark. Now, the conventions of dog ownership, pet ownership in general, have changed a lot over the last 300 years when this halacha was being written, or 250 years. But nonetheless, I think we can appreciate at least the concept. I don't know why there was so much verbiage in the Sif. I think it could have been written much more tersely. I'm not really sure. I understand why the Rav Shulchan Aruch expanded it so much, but the message is very clear. Don't have anything in your possession that can potentially cause a hazard or damage to others, even if the damage is only encountered by them coming onto your property. That's number one. And then number two, the issue of raising a dog is that you can raise a dog as long as it doesn't bite. If you have a biting dog, so then there's an isser to have such a dog unless you keep it tied up the entire day and you only let it roam out at night. Now, what does that mean? You let it roam at night? What if people are going to the movies at night for a dinner? Then obviously the halacha would change. Anytime there are people still out on the street, which for us could be practically 24/7, then it will be problematic. That's what we call coyotes, right? The ones that are roaming the street at all hours of the day and night, and they do cause terror, right? You can see that just as an example. So a person would never be allowed to, I think it's a municipal ordinance in most cities, that you're not allowed to even let your dog just roam freely without a leash, even if the dog is not a ferocious animal. But the bottom line is that you have to make sure that the public is protected from anything that presents a hazard. Okay?
Rabbi, we have other issues now about scoop and poop and scoop stuff, right? So you can't just let a dog run wild because then you're not taking care of the cleanliness aspect.
True. I guess that wasn't such a concern back in the day with the dirt roads and the sanitation department not picking up garbage every Thursday.
I think even 20 years ago it was probably not even a concern somehow.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true. That's true.
So I guess all you really have now is these off-leash kind of parks where if you really want your dog to run, this area is set aside for that.
Right. That's right. That's where, it's, but even there, you wouldn't be allowed to release a dog that presents a hazard. That's going to be biting people.
True.
Right? But
even
we have a lot of dog lovers in society today. We want to make sure that
the dog barking, you either want to come in or barking outside a whole lot, don't wake people up.
Yeah.
But it's not really, the municipality wouldn't really much about that, but I don't know where that falls, but it's invading people's
invading people's privacy and depriving them of quality of life. Well, we know from previous halachas that you're not allowed to create damage through noise. You're not allowed to create noise damage, right? You're not allowed to create vibratory damage. So clearly, if an animal that I own is barking the whole night, then there's a gezel shena, there's stealing people's sleep, and there's a whole lot of issues that are involved. So sure, he hasn't talked about it in this. If maybe we'll see it somewhere else, I'm not sure. Okay, let's take a look now at the Imrei Yaakov. Chayev lasos lo fulia. If you have a pit or a pool on your property, you have to create a barrier around it. V'yesh levarich al zeh kamo b'makel gago v'yesh omrim de'en levarich. There's a machlokes whether you make a bracha when you build a fence around your swimming pool. Isn't that interesting? Some say that you make the Minchas Chinuch says that you should make a bracha, and the Chayei Adam says that you should not. But now it's not a classic ma'akeh. So the ma'akeh is on a rooftop over a living space, right? So we know that there's so many different shittas as far as whether to make a bracha or not. But everyone agrees that you have to make a barrier around a fencing around your swimming pool or around any other kind of pit that you have in your property. Because there are people that invariably may come onto your property that don't know how to swim, such as small children and the like. So the Torah says, "Hishomer lecha ushmor nafshecha ma'od." You have to be very careful about your soul. So that was another pasuk that the Rav Shulchan Aruch had brought to require every person to remove hazards from their purview. After pasuk zekoi al zikaron maimed har Sinai ushar dvarim shemavuarim sham bepasuk tzarich loymar de kabbalas chazal hoisa de koi gam al shmiras haguf. So Rav Stern just points out the exegesis of this pasuk is a little bit strange, because the Torah over there, when it says be careful and watch over, guard your soul carefully, is not really referring to taking care of your body and your welfare, but rather is saying, Pentishkachis, the rest of the pasuk says, be very careful never to forget what you saw at Mount Sinai. So what Chazal are basically doing is they're taking a segment of that pasuk and applying it to a different, be very careful. When the Torah says be very careful, to never forget what you saw at Mount Sinai. But what Chazal are doing is they're just taking the words, be very careful about your soul, and they apply it to other things as well, that you have to be very, very careful to protect your soul. Okay, Yud Beis, Sulam Ra'u'ah, a dilapidated or rickety ladder. Nira Didvarim Halalu Enam Bichlal Ase Dema'ake. He says, while it's true, you can't leave anything hazardous on your property, it's not that, like leaving a ladder that's dangerous, about to break, is not included in the mitzvah of building a parapet. The nafkamina de'in mevorchem aleihem v'gam yochol lahasir hezek al yedei nachri chadomish enan b'nei shlichus. So the ramification being is that, by removing a broken ladder, you're not, there's no bracha. You could do it via a Gentile. You don't have to worry about, the details of the mitzvah. Okay. And then he said, when a dog is chained, there's people are not as afraid of the dog, and therefore it's okay even if the dog's like a ferocious pit bull. So when a dog is chained up, there's not even the concern that a woman would miscarry by hearing the dog barking. Because once people see that the dog is chained up, they're not going to fear the dog, and it's not going to cause that same kind of trauma that would potentially cause a woman to be so distressed that she miscarries. The im hakelev mazik liktanim nira deshari lahargo. What if a dog injures small people, small children? He says it's permitted to kill an animal when it is injurious to others. Like the Shulchan Aruch says, the chatul ra shemazik liktanim ein tzarich lahashiva liba'olim. He says, so for example, if you have a cat that injures children, goes ahead and claws at children, you don't have to first capture the cat, return it to its owner, and have a din Torah with the owner. Shulchan Aruch says that anyone has permission to kill the animal. I don't know whether you'd be sued in today's world. You killed, Spot, and he was our family pet, right? Yeah, but your dog was about to maul my baby, right? So, and not only that, but you get to keep the animal's pelt, the animal's hide. So, fine, what? So, that's right. Make a little carpet out of it. Yeah, make a little rug. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not sure how this would line up with contemporary law, because it could be in contemporary law that an animal, I know in the state of California, an animal is judged, any pet is judged as a wild animal, and the owner is ultimately responsible, even if the dog bites someone on your own property and was provoked, you still are liable. I know that because it happened to when I was a little boy. Yeah. Oh, if it's a wild animal? No, I don't know about that. No, a dog, but a dog. Let's say your family has a pet dog and the dog bites someone. Yeah. So you're automatically liable, even if it's not on your property. If you own that dog, you will be legally liable for any damage, right? And I don't know whether that's true in Canada or not. I have no idea, but that's certainly true in California. At least it was. Who knows? Maybe the animal lovers changed the law by now. V'hine hadi isa kan b'divrei harav the kelev she'eno ra she'eno minaveach the shori legadlo. He says, even though the conclusion of the Rav Shulchan Aruch is that if a dog is not ferocious and does not bite people, you're allowed to keep such a dog. Mikol makom ein lahatir ela kelev echad k'dei sheyishmor beso. He says, but we can only permit a person to own one dog to act as a guard dog for your house. Aval tfei michad kasav b'shelas yavitz the iser gomer hu l'chol adam uv'chol kelev. The Yavitz, who's 16th century, Yavitz is 18th century, I think. He writes that you're not allowed to have more than one dog. Unless you have multiple properties, and each property needs its own guard dog. But you're not allowed to have more than one dog if you live in one house, because we can only justify allowing you to have a dog to act as protection. Now, little did the Yavitz know about little Fifi that the lady carries around in her purse, right? Fifi is not a guard dog, and Fifi is not a hazard to the public, right? And probably you could have more than one Fifi, right? So we're talking about the dogs that were, when dogs were dogs, Uveyichud osam klavim. He says, now let's talk about the fifis. He says, those dogs that people purchase just to play with and to act as a source of enjoyment, he says, he says, there's a separate problem with those dogs, is that it just causes a person to become a letz, just a lazy, good for nothing, because you're going to spend all your time playing with your dog instead of doing more productive things with your time. And to play with dogs just for no other reason than just you want to have a good time with your dog, he says that's something that the Gentiles do. That's not something that a Jew is supposed to do. It's a goyish zachem, right? So you can see a lot has changed, right? The conventions have changed within society. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do that are frivolous and are gratuitous and that waste a lot of time. We engage in recreational activities. We watch television. We watch, and we go to sporting events and we play with dogs in the park, right? We play frisbee with dogs in the park. In the times of the Yavitz, that was considered to be, what are you wasting your time? What are you doing things that the Gentiles do to destroy their lives? Just to idle the time away. So,
Rabbi, what about mental health? Having these things for
absolutely. So dogs are sometimes very important for mental health issues. But what did they know about mental health issues
and physical health as well? I mean, taking the dog for a walk.
Years ago, yeah,
right.
Physical health also.
Yeah,
your dog can help you exercise, go for a walk, and go for a run, and all of those other things. Yeah, so the world has clearly changed since this halacha was written, but I think there's value in reading about it, because we have to appreciate that stam wasting your time is something that Chazal frowned upon. So that even if you have a dog that you love, you have a very close relationship. I had a good relationship with my dog when I was a teenager. And I used to love spending time with my dog. But you have to know that there are limits to that as well. Don't allow your preoccupation with your pet to become an all-consuming thing where you start believing you're a dog. And there's this woman that was featured on social media that believes she's a wolf, whatever. And it's a lot of craziness, right? Anyway.
So, Rabbi, I did look up the Dog Owners Liability Act of Ontario, if you're interested, and it says effectively the same. Essentially, under the law, dog owners are liable for any injury or damage to people or property that their dog causes. It also applies if dogs bite another domestic animal. And it says
Okay.
even if the victim provoked the dog in some degree, you'll still be held negligent and will pay a reduced fine.
Yes. Okay. Did everyone hear that? Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for that, Paul. Yes, Ron.
I don't know if it was really a change from 20 years ago because really, is it really? I know it's for mental health and there's other effects, but only dog bite. How dignified is it to see a Jew, a dog leading a Jew walking down the street with a leash? Other sort of things about wasting time. Those things probably haven't really changed. It's just that maybe society has changed, but if we hold on to a lot of our traditions, why should that really have changed?
Well, you raise a good point. First of all, I'm not sure if it's considered undignified. You use that term undignified. Is it undignified to be walking a dog?
Well, sometimes the dog's walking you. Right?
It's probably undignified to have to pick up after your dog, though.
Is it undignified to pick up your dog's droppings? I don't know. I think undignified is a subjective term. Some people might find it to be dignified or undignified. I think that's really a question of what's societal norms. But is it considered wasting time? That's really So yes, if a person spends all of his waking hours either working, eating, or learning Torah, then for his wife goes to him and says, "I want a dog. I'm lonely in the house," and then you're going to have to walk the dog. So he has a right to say, "I'm not going to spend my time. I have a chavrusa. From the time that I finish dinner until the time that I go to bed. I'm not going to take out time from my work or from my chavrusa to walk the dog. Nothing doing." And I think that's a legitimate thing. Why is she so lonely? Maybe because you're in the base medrash all night. You never spend any time with him. So that's a shalom bias issue. There are times when it's justifiable to not spend time in the base medrash if your wife says she needs time. I mean, why should we be wasting time with our wives, right? What a waste of time. Your wife wants to go shopping, she wants to do. You should tell her, "Listen, I don't have time for you." That there was such a prevailing attitude back in the day, right? Where husbands would say to their wives, I don't have time for this. You want to go out and schmooze and talk and walk and go here, go there. I don't have time. I got a chavrusa. I don't have time for that. So clearly things have changed. So if a person is a no-nonsense kind of person, then perhaps you're right. I get a sense that most of us are not as structured in our lives and are not as committed to not wasting a second in the way that is being described over here. So I think that we have other demons that we have to tackle in modern Jewish living other than pet ownership. I think that certainly there are people who can take pet ownership to the extreme and go overboard with it and make that during COVID, a lot of people got dogs. And I was very sympathetic to that. I had a lot of shilas about, can I buy a dog? And then, what do I do about spaying or neutering the dog? We had a lot of shilas that came up over COVID about that and about walking the dog and things like that on Shabbos and stuff. So, but then I saw a guy who used to be a regular at Shabbos morning minyan. And every Shabbos morning, I would see him spending the whole morning walking his dog because he got a COVID dog and he wasn't interested in coming back to shul. See, these are the challenges that we have, but it's not the dog's fault, right? The dog is not the problem. It's not that the dog caused him to stop going to shul. He was looking for something to do to not have to come to shul, so he got himself a dog and now uses the dog as his pretense to no longer be committed to shul going. So it's what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? So so this whole halacha has to really be modernized to adjust to the mores of our modern society. Okay. Okay, well, point well taken. We'll hold it.